Welcome to Icon Coaching. My name's Kirk and I'm one of the coaches.
The key is to get started.
We often have clients come in and they're trying to figure out goals. They're trying to figure out where they're going. And we'll ask them this question. So what do you want? Which we think is the second hardest question in the world. And they'll start to describe things they want. And a common answer we get is, I want to build wealth. I'm like, okay, that's doable. And I'll say, why? And they said, because I want financial freedom. I said, well, what do you want financial freedom for? And they'll say, so I don't have to worry about money, so I can do whatever I want. But that was my question. What do you want? And they're under the false idea that if they could make enough money, they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore, which, by the way, isn't true. The more money you make, the more money you have to worry about. But it's often the case that they have no idea how much wealth they need or how much money they need to make in order to be able to have the freedom to do what they want. They've never thought about that. Because when I ask, well, how much money do you want to make? How much would do that? They don't know. Because what they're looking for is the freedom that comes from having the freedom of choice. But what I'm asking them to do is begin to articulate a choice they want to make. And that doesn't always feel like freedom. It's actually the surrendering of the freedom of choice and living into your choice. What do you want is a question that will exclude almost everything else. That's part of what makes it the second hardest question in the world. Let me tell you a story to demonstrate this point. A few years ago, this guy retired from New York, made a ton of money, very, very wealthy man. And he went down the coast and ended up in this little fishing village, started hanging out with a guy that would take him fishing every day. He had a boat and a dock and a little cabin right on the water. And they'd go out fish every day. And it was wonderful. It was relaxing. It was enjoyable. The weather was great. They'd have long, meaningful conversations. The retiree began to notice that there was a real opportunity here, that this fisherman owned a prime piece of real estate in an area that was going to start to expand with tourism. And so he said to him one day, he said, what if I got a bunch of investment and we put it into your property? We bought a bunch of boats, and when we hired a bunch of staff to captains to run the boats and crew and deckhands, and then we could build out. And he starts to describe building out this large resort center with a hotel and multiple properties and custom homes and little restaurants and tiki huts and this whole ecosystem. And he said, I'll bet we could scale this idea up, and I'll bet in 20 or 30 years of really hard work, you'd retire a very wealthy man. And he's trying to motivate him. He's trying to capture his imagination. He's trying to open up the opportunity for him to think about what he wants. And he says, what would you do if you had all that money? If you did all that work and you were able to sell all this, you had all the money you could ever imagine, what would you do? And the young fisherman looked at him and he said, I'd probably go fishing every day and want to hang out with my family. Which, of course, was exactly what he was doing. We often think that we have to make just scads of money in order to have the financial freedom and flexibility to do what we want, when in fact, we could do what we want kind of right now. The way this plays out for me in my dialogues is I'll say, what do you want? I want to make a ton of money. I'll say, why? So I can do whatever you want. Well, what would that be? And they'll say, I want to spend more time with my family. But of course, the amount of money it's going to take them to do that might take them 10 or 15 years. So I'll ask, how old are your kids? And they're like, oh, they're 5 and 8. So it's going to take you 10 or 15 years to gain financial freedom in order to hang out with your kids more, who are going to be gone at that point or on their way out the door. It doesn't make any sense. We don't think this through well. We often use things like financial freedom to dodge the question, but we're dodging the question for a reason, and I think it's a pretty good reason. What do you want is the second hardest question in the world. Why is it so hard? Well, the way we're asking this question has depth to it. A lot of times people will answer this question in very trivial ways. I want to change the world. I want to have an impact. What does that mean? They're meaningless statements. They're beautiful words strung together like a Hallmark card. They don't bring us into a sense of goal setting or a sense of describing something we actually want to accomplish. Why is this the second hardest question in the world? And I think it's largely because it's a very vulnerable question. It's very hard to take something that is rooted deep in us, that feels like us. It feels so connected to our identity that to actually bring it out in the world and say we want it risks failing at it. And if you risk failing at it, are you risking failing at being you? I would say the answer to that is no. You're only risking failing at doing you. It is a deeply revealing and exposing thing to answer this question with any degree of specificity. I want to accomplish that because it matters to me, because it has meaning and purpose connected to it. But you have to answer this question well, in a way that has meaning and purpose, in order to have a life with meaning and purpose. Otherwise, you go after meaningless things. This question is hard because it's vulnerable. We often think of vulnerability in its past tense form. And it has a past tense form, but it has a present tense form and a future tense form. The past tense form is sharing something about myself I'm not particularly proud of. The present tense form is to just truly be with somebody. But future tense vulnerability is to reveal and expose something that you want in the world that will come from inside, that you are intrinsically motivated to go after. It's vulnerable to do that, because if you fail at it, then what? Well, you try again. You go after something else. We fail at all kinds of things. It does not mean you have failed at being you. You've only failed at doing you. You are not a failure, but what you did in the world didn't work. So go for it again. It's the central lesson of entrepreneurship. It's a lesson of leadership. It's a lesson of doing anything that matters in the world. And that's why answering this question is so important. The things that we want, if connected to something intrinsic, if connected to our identity, those are the things that bring meaning and purpose in the world. Most of us kid ourselves. Most of us say we want to be happy. And happy's fine, and happy's good, but happy comes and goes. The human seems to be willing to trade happy for meaning. And to truly answer this question, what do you want, is to go after meaning. It might make you happy too. This is why the question, what do you want, matters so much. Because answering it well, answering it from an intrinsic place, revealing our identity and exposing ourselves to the world through the attempt at doing something is what brings meaning and purpose back to work.